Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Hello. So some of you may want to turn your chairs around so that you'll be comfortable for our presidential address that's coming up. In case you don't know me, my name is Amy Sayward. I am very happy to very happy to serve as SHAFR's executive director. It's especially wonderful to see all of you again in person. I hope you noticed some of the slides that we had of our award winners since 2020. It's our first time sort of coming together to recognize them as well. So always wonderful to do that. And it's been a long time that we've been waiting to get to New Orleans. One of the things I especially want to thank our sponsors who helped to make this event possible, many of whom donated in 2019 for this conference. The University of New Orleans, the University of Louisiana Lafayette, the Tulane University, of course, which has been such a gracious host to us, the New Orleans Center for the Gulf South, and Brill, who are the publishers of SHAFR's guide that's accessible to you through the SHAFR website. And our specific sponsor for this luncheon is Virginia Tech's College of Liberal Arts and Human Sciences, which was very honored to recognize its dean this year as SHAFR's president. But before we get to Laura's presidential address, I have a couple more people to thank. I would especially invite any members of the program committee who are present to please stand and remain standing when I read your name. So Daniel, thank you. Also, certainly last but not least, I want to thank the many people who have been working behind the scenes to make the conference so enjoyable for all of us. So Jana Littman of Tulane University and Gunter Bischoff from the University of New Orleans are working way behind the scenes. They're both in Austria this year. They had hoped to welcome us in person in 2020, but they did a lot of work to lay the groundwork for this conference. And also Lindsay Harris, a PhD student here at Tulane. Lindsay, please stand. She was in charge of this morning's job workshop and also helping us throughout this year as we were planning. And many of you have not yet had the opportunity to meet George Fuji, who is SHAFR's IT director and who I could not do my work without. George, would you please? And we were very fortunate this year to have Katie O'Connell join us as our SHAFR conference coordinator in February. I'm afraid she had a baptism by fire with our bus rearrangements, but she's done an awesome job. Please thank her. And now it's my pleasure to cede the podium to Andrew Preston, who will introduce Laura.
Thanks, Amy. And just another thanks to Daniel and Emily and everyone who worked on this conference to bring us back in person for where we can meet together and exchange ideas and be together. It's just so amazing once again to be together and not on Zoom and not on FeedLoop for the entire conference as we were last year. Normally the president-elect introduces the president for the presidential lecture, but Ann Heiss, who will be SHAFR president next year, can't be here. And so I'm going to take her place. Now, this is a real opportunity for me because I was supposed to introduce Kristen Hoganson in 2020. And of course, that conference got canceled and I didn't have that opportunity. So I now get a chance to introduce the president to deliver her presidential address. And another kind of irony, Laura actually introduced me for my presidential address last year. This is probably the first and maybe the only time, hopefully the only time in SHAFR history where we'll do that old kind of switcheroo where we introduce each other. So it is my pleasure to introduce SHAFR's president this year. Laura Belmonte is familiar to anyone who has traveled in SHAFR circles for any time or who has read in the field of US diplomatic history. She completed her PhD with Mel Leffler at the University of Virginia in 1996. Her dissertation became the book, Selling the American Way, US Propaganda and the Cold War, which was published by Penn in 2008. And this was published while she was teaching at Oklahoma State University. While she has continued to look at public diplomacy in a variety of venues, she has also blazed new trails for our field in her studies of the global intersections between the LGBTQ+ movement, human rights, and HIV/AIDS, with contributions to diplomatic history, among other places, and in her newest book, The International LGBT Rights Movement, a History, published in 2020 by Bloomsbury. Oklahoma State recognized her leadership skills and appointed her to a number of administrative roles before she moved to Virginia Tech in the fall of 2019 to become the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. And I can't imagine worse timing where you're going to be something like a university dean at the end of 2019. Who knew what was coming around the corner? Right on the eve of a global pandemic that posed unprecedented challenges to educational institutions around the world. However, those of us in SHAFR had already recognized Laura's strengths in leadership as she served on council, the DH editorial board, and many SHAFR committees. Most recently, she moderated our 2019 State of SHAFR membership meeting before being elected president-elect in 2021. Without further ado, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Laura Belmonte's presidential address, Can Human Rights Survive Technology? Join me in welcoming Laura to the podium.
In October 2017, Sophia addressed the 3,800 attendees gathered for the first ever Future Investment Initiative in Riyadh. Her bald head was uncovered. She was unaccompanied by a man. Bearing a striking resemblance to the late actor Audrey Hepburn, Sophia thanked the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for making her the first robot in the world granted citizenship. The irony of the humanoid Sophia possessing more rights than real-life Saudi women did not go unnoticed. After all, Saudi women had just won the right to drive months earlier. They, unlike Sophia, were still legally mandated to wear hijabs and to have male guardians make financial and legal decisions on their behalf. Sophia was also exempted from the Saudi law barring non-Muslims from obtaining citizenship. Her declarations that my AI is designed around human values such as wisdom, kindness, and compassion. I strive to be an empathetic robot, and I will do my best to make the world a better place, did little to assuage critics of the Saudi regime and those worried about the implications of machines possessing civil liberties denied many people. It might have been possible to dismiss Sophia's citizenship as a publicity stunt, had it not coexisted with serious debates about electronic personhood. In early 2017, the European Parliament's Legal Affairs Committee voted 17-2 in favor of recommendations calling for the European Union to adopt regulations governing the creation, use, and impact of artificial intelligence and robots. Although the authors of the report did not suggest that robots be accorded fundamental human rights, such as the rights to marry or vote, They did call for self-learning robots to be insured and held liable should they injure people or damage property. 156 artificial intelligence experts released an open letter denouncing the recommendations, portraying them as a ruse that would allow robotics manufacturers to escape responsibility for their machines. Although the reality of robots capable of human-like emotions, self-consciousness, or decision-making capabilities remains confined to the realm of science fiction for now, it is abundantly clear that the time to consider whether intelligent machines are entities worthy of rights, freedoms, and protections, and how we can guard our rights, freedom, and protections from them is upon us. The intellectual trajectory of my career has brought me to a place where I often contemplate the intersections and contradictions of human rights and technology. Technological innovations such as radio broadcasting, television, and jamming played a central role in my work on propaganda and cultural diplomacy. My most recent book situates the international lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender rights movement into the history of human rights. My role as Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Human Sciences at Virginia Tech puts me in constant dialogue with scholars grappling with the human impacts of technology and has made me a passionate advocate for humanists and social scientists working as vital partners with engineers and scientists in the creation, implementation, and regulation of technology. Over the last 5 years, our field has dramatically expanded the lenses through which we evaluate international relations. Historians like Walter Lefebvre, Jonathan Reed Winkler, and Kate Epstein have illuminated how technology shapes the political, economic, military, and social factors at the core of foreign policy decision-making. Concurrently, scholars are documenting the origins and the evolution of the international human rights agenda. While certainly not an exhaustive historical analysis of these trends, this essay seeks to demonstrate the critical importance of integrating these two bodies of scholarship, while illuminating some of the most alarming facets of the effects of technology on contemporary global politics and society. I highlight a few issues exemplifying the complex ways in which technology is both advancing and imperiling human rights in 3 key areas: privacy, advocacy, and warfare. Although privacy is enshrined as a fundamental right in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, and the constitutions of more than 150 countries, technology has significantly eroded both the notion of privacy itself and individuals' ability to protect their personal data from misuse by governments, corporations, and criminals. State surveillance is certainly nothing new. Consider the methods of the Stasi in the German Democratic Republic, or the provisions of the original Patriot Act that permitted the US government to monitor banking transactions, phone calls, and library records. But the scope and ease of these efforts today far exceeds anything we could have imagined during the Cold War or the immediate aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. From smartphones to the Internet of Things to the step trackers on our wrists, we are willingly, if not always knowingly, granting an innumerable array of private and public actors access to everything we buy, everywhere we go, intimate details about our health, our internet history, our financial history, our political views, our friends, families, and more. It should not be at all surprising that this avalanche of digital, biometric, and geospatial data is often used in ways that harm the economically disadvantaged. Consumers living in zip codes with high crime rates or low average household incomes find themselves bombarded with digital ads for subprime mortgages, payday loans, and for-profit colleges. Digital scrutiny also informs why mortgage and insurance rates are higher and police response times slower in these neighborhoods. Complex algorithms reject job applicants on the basis of predicted health risks or low credit scores. Judges in several states use data models in setting bail and sentencing. Recent investigations have found that these algorithms impose harsher criminal penalties on defendants of color, mirroring biases in policing occurring in the non-virtual world. Some states have developed software designed to root out fraud in public assistance programs, but make it extraordinarily difficult for those falsely accused of misusing benefits to clear their records or extricate themselves from fines. The algorithms driving the software fueling these trends are not neutral strings of ones and zeros, but are potent reflections of the racial, class, and gender biases of those creating the code and aggregating the data. Artificial intelligence researchers like Joy Buolamwini, a computer scientist in the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's Media Lab and founder of the Algorithmic Justice League, have identified coding biases in facial recognition and automatic assessment software that perpetuate discrimination against women and underrepresented groups. In late 2020, Google drew a firestorm of criticism when it fired Timnit Gebru, the technical co-lead of its ethical AI team and co-founder of Black in AI, in a dispute over her work with a research team calling for technology companies to ensure that software emulating human speech did not amplify historic patterns of racism and sexism. The fact that Gebru was one of the few Black women among Google's research scientists and a vocal critic of the company's diversity practices was especially distressing to critics of Google's overwhelmingly white male corporate culture. The use of digital technologies in law enforcement in the workplace also merits consideration. In 2017, the Supreme Court ruled in Carpenter v. United States that police must obtain a warrant in order to access mobile phone location data from a service provider. But neither the Electronic Communications Privacy Act nor the Stored Communication Act bars private employers from surveilling their employees on company-issued devices and computers without prior notification, as required in some states and under the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation. These practices include logging keystrokes to check productivity, audio and video monitoring, compiling email and website logs, tracking physical locations, and investigating prospective and current employees' social media posts. When remote work became the norm during the COVID pandemic, the use and criticism of these technologies escalated greatly as boundaries between the workplace and home vanished. Where employers viewed these measures as an appropriate way to ensure productivity from employees who could no longer be observed in the office, employees who became aware of the electronic surveillance found it rather Orwellian, voicing fears that private data stored on home computers now used for work would be compromised, and objecting to have to re-engage facial recognition software every time they went to the bathroom, tended to a family member, or moved in their chair. Spyware like Pegasus enables even more troubling practices. Created by an Israeli company called the NSO Group, the software gives the operator access to the microphone, camera, GPS data, passwords, audio and visual recordings, email and voicemails on the unsuspecting user's infected phone. In 2021, 17 media outlets from 10 countries joined forces with Amnesty International's Security Lab and Forbidden Stories, a French nonprofit, in investigating a leak of 50,000 phone numbers of people who might have been surveilled. Their work revealed authoritarian regimes' pervasive use of Pegasus to target heads of state, diplomats, journalists, political dissidents, business executives, academics, and activists. The revelations directly contradicted NSO Group's repeated assertions that only governments conducting legitimate investigations into terrorism and crime were allowed to purchase Pegasus. In early 2022, the European Parliament launched a formal inquiry into possible human rights violations linked to Pegasus, the findings of which could lead to more stringent EU privacy rules. But the challenges of enforcing one continent's standards of privacy across the internet are monumental, and advocates differ widely in their views of whether privacy rights can be protected without compromising freedoms of speech, association, and expression. In the 1990s, the Zapatista movement in Mexico and anti-globalization protests provided powerful early examples of the ways that digital technologies have transformed human rights advocacy around the world. The internet, smartphones, social media, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, hacking software, and data mining have given activists unprecedented capacity to generate global awareness of human rights violations, to mobilize supporters, and to provide evidence supporting their claims. But these tools have also empowered states and private actors who wish to intimidate or harm those exposing corruption, atrocities, and injustice. As Ronald Neeson warns in #HumanRights, quote, "These very technologies have begun to transcend human will and agency, creating vacuums of transparency and opportunities for domination, surveillance, and stifling of dissent." These stark realities have forced many of us, myself included, to revise the more benign views of technology we formerly held. In 2006, when Facebook broadened its desired audience beyond college campuses and began encouraging anyone over the age of 13 to join, and the podcasting company Odeo launched Twitter, there was abundant evidence that digital networks were invaluable tools for advocates seeking to build community and affect social change. Two major human rights agreements crafted that same year: the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the Yogyakarta Principles on the Application of Human Rights Law in relation to sexual orientation and gender identity, reflected decades of advocacy by international activists whose strategies capitalized on technologies that help them overcome their particular structural conditions of isolation, marginalization, and powerlessness. 5 years later, when protests swept the Middle East and North Africa, the Arab Spring seemed to herald a new era in which digital communication and organizing would be formidable weapons in populist struggles against autocracy, censorship, and inequality. Such hopes proved illusory, as many of the democratic victories yielded in the aftermath of the Arab Spring were reversed, and authoritarian regimes quickly grasped the power of digital technologies in crushing opposition and propagating disinformation. While Iran and China have segregated their internet users from the rest of the world, many other state and private actors have adopted far less expensive measures to quash messages and activities they find objectionable. Shutting down internet access is now a common tactic used by autocratic and illiberal regimes attempting to crush civil unrest, suppress dissent, or prevent exposure of human rights abuses. In 2020 alone, there were 93 state-imposed internet outages in 21 different countries, ranging from complete blocks on internet use to partial restriction of social media platforms to slowing the speed with which data can travel. An even larger number of state and private actors intentionally inundate citizens with information aimed at exacerbating distrust of the media and invalidating dissenting voices. The tidal wave of falsehoods is chillingly effective in increasing popular confusion, cynicism, and disengagement. Big tech has both aided and thwarted these autocrats. Telegram, a messaging app created by a Russian exile named Pavel Durov, is a good example. Used to great effect in protests in Hong Kong, Belarus, Iran, and elsewhere, Telegram allows users to create encrypted group chats that have the targeting capabilities of social media combined with the privacy of messaging tools like WhatsApp. Over Telegram channels, advocates can quickly alert supporters about the locations of demonstrations, arrests, violence, and available medical and material resources. Telegram can be privately operated from anywhere and does not accept advertising. If paired with the app Siphon, Telegram can circumvent most firewalls. In 2018, after Durov refused to surrender encrypted data to security officials, Russia banned Telegram. Russian users ignored the prohibition and simply used the app over their own virtual private networks, a tactic that so vexed Russian authorities that Telegram was re-legalized 2 years later. But the same features that make Telegram a big asset for activists also make it attractive to terrorists and criminals. In late 2020, despite the libertarian leanings of its founder, Telegram cooperated with Europol and removed thousands of channels associated with ISIS. It is proven far more problematic when, in the absence of government regulation, big tech has policed itself. Facebook's real name policy is a potent example. Unlike Twitter or Reddit, which allow accounts to be registered using pseudonyms, providing they are not impersonating another person, company, or organization, Facebook requires individuals to provide a government ID, utility bill, or library card as proof of their real names when they open an account. Users pointed out numerous problems with the policy, including Facebook algorithms' failure to recognize Native American, Aboriginal, or other names with too many letters, multiple capitalizations, or initials as first names. LGBTQ individuals criticized the policy for forcing people to out themselves, even in circumstances that could result in persecution or harm. Victims of sexual abuse and domestic violence levied similar complaints. For the first decade of its existence, Facebook refused to change the rule, claiming that it helped to, quote, keep our community safe, unquote. In December 2015, after months of protests, Facebook finally agreed to modify the policy by allowing a person whose account was suspended on the basis of a fake name to indicate whether they had special circumstances. The revised policy also requires anyone challenging the veracity of another user's name to provide specific reasons, thus undercutting the possibility of report and take down harassment of activists and users from marginalized groups. Because the social media giant said nothing about how it collected, used, and shared its users' personal information, the Electronic Frontier Foundation lambasted Facebook for forcing, quote, those who are most vulnerable to reveal even more information about their intimate personal lives. The only way they can use a pseudonym is to share more information, resulting in a remedy that is useless and risks putting them in a more dangerous situation should Facebook share those personal details. Advocates have raised similar concerns about Facebook's free basics service. Introduced in 2013 as part of an initiative called internet.org, Free Basics is marketed as a means of expanding internet access in the developing world, where about 3 billion people, mostly in the global south, do not have reliable internet. By 2019, the service was available in 65 nations. The mobile app gives users localized versions that provide no-fee access to a limited number of text-only websites through the search engine Bing, stripping out photos and videos that can be viewed only by purchasing a data plan. The chosen sites are curated by Facebook. There is no email and no social media platforms other than Facebook can be used. Digital rights groups criticize Free Basics for its limited language options, its heavy reliance on third-party services owned by U.S. companies, its secretive data practices, and its violations of net neutrality. Ellery Biddle, advocacy director for the citizen media group Global Voices, asserted, quote, Facebook is not introducing people to open internet where you can learn, create, and build new things. It's building this little web that turns the user into a mostly passive consumer of Western corporate culture. That's digital colonialism. In February 2016, digital rights activists celebrated when the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India banned Free Basics and any other free mobile data apps that violated net neutrality. The move followed a multi-million-dollar lobbying and advertising campaign by Facebook and marked a huge, if rare, setback for the social media company's efforts to expand its global user base. In response, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg used his personal Facebook page to vow that the company would continue trying to reach the 1 billion people in India without internet access. We know contacting them can lift people out of poverty, create millions of jobs, and spread education opportunities. We care about these people, he wrote. Such grandiose claims rang hollow as the 2016 US presidential campaign soon demonstrated that entire nations could be victims of the weaponization of social media. In August 2016, The Guardian broke the story of how teenagers in Velez, Macedonia, an economically depressed industrial town in an isolated part of the former Yugoslavia, made small fortunes plagiarizing or replicating misinformation found in the US right-wing media and posting it on websites and Facebook pages they created to target supporters of Donald Trump. The teens profited every time readers clicked on embedded ads tracked by online networks like Google AdSense. False headlines like Hillary Clinton in 2013. I would like to see people like Donald Trump run for office. They're honest and they can't be bought. Generated tens of thousands of shares, reactions, and repostings, enabling the teens to earn as much as $10,000 a month in a place with a nearly 25% unemployment rate. When pressed about the possible consequences of his propagation of fake news, one teen nonchalantly replied, I didn't force anybody to give me money. People sell cigarettes. They sell alcohol. That's not illegal. Why is my business illegal? If you sell cigarettes, cigarettes kill people. I didn't kill anyone. That same weekend, a gunman opened fire at Comet Ping Pong after being persuaded by internet-based conspiracy theories that the Washington, D.C. pizzeria was a front for a pedophile ring operated by Democrats. While no one was injured in the shooting, and the incident was not linked to any of the sites operated out of Veles, Pizzagate underscored the possible tragic real-world consequences of misinformation. While profit motivated the teens in Veles, Russian operatives aimed to undermine democracy. As documented in the 448-page Mueller report released in April 2019, Russia used digital technologies to disrupt the 2016 elections in, quote, sweeping and systematic fashion, unquote. Their tactics included hacking into state voter databases and private email accounts of leading figures and organizations in the Democratic Party and the Hillary Clinton campaign team, releasing stolen information to WikiLeaks, and spreading propaganda on the internet and social media. In July 2018, a federal jury indicted 12 Russian military intelligence officers for conspiracy against the United States, using a false name to register a web domain, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit money laundering as part of the master plan to sway the 2016 election toward Donald Trump. No arrests have yet been made. But Russian intelligence officers were far from alone in exploiting flaws in social media applications for political ends. In March 2018, the New York Times, working in collaboration with the Observer of London and The Guardian, reported that Cambridge Analytica, a data mining company largely owned by American conservative activist Robert Mercer, had illegally obtained the personal information of 87 million Facebook users. Exploiting a flaw in Facebook's application programming interface, a researcher named Alexander Kogan designed a quiz called "This is Your Digital Life." Unbeknownst to the 270,000 Facebook users who answered, the quiz gave Cambridge Analytica access to all of the respondents' personal data, as well as that of all of their friends. The firm then used the stolen data to create psychological profiles of voters and sold it to political operatives seeking to elect Donald Trump in the United States and to extricate the United Kingdom from the European Union. The ensuing furor triggered what was then the biggest scandal in Facebook's history. Called before Congress to explain, Facebook CEO Zuckerberg faced tough questions from House and Senate lawmakers demanding answers about the company's misuse of data. Zuckerberg vowed to make improvements that would allow users to delete their Facebook histories, to improve privacy controls, and to ban apps that harvested personal data for suspicious purposes. In July 2019, the Federal Trade Commission fined Facebook approximately $5 billion for mishandling users' personal information, the biggest fine ever imposed by the US government on a technology company, but only a fraction of Facebook's $55 billion revenue in 2018. But the agency stopped short of placing severe limitations on how the social media giant collected and shared data. By that time, Facebook was confronting unanticipated fallout from a major overhaul of the algorithms that drove its popular news feed. In early 2018, even as the Cambridge Analytica controversy was exploding, Facebook executives were worried that users were spending less time engaging content. In response, Facebook recalibrated its algorithms to boost meaningful social interactions with family and friends, instead of professionally created material that its own corporate research suggested harmed users' mental health. An internal point system awarded 1 point for a like, but 30 points for an original comment, post, or reshare. The system also added additional points based on the audience with whom the content was shared. The changes backfired spectacularly. Posts designed to provoke an angry response drew the greatest user engagement, a fact that a host of political actors and publications soon exploited by posting increasingly sensationalized and infuriating content. Despite the efforts of Facebook employees like Sophie Zhang and Frances Haugen, who alerted executives to the escalating use of fake pages and misinformation by businesses, individuals, and political actors seeking to manipulate users' real-world actions, Facebook leaders dissembled and did little to rein in such coordinated, inauthentic behavior. That's the term Facebook uses internally for this phenomenon. Reports of orchestrated misinformation campaigns and fake pages designed to shape a particular nation's politics or to demonize ethnic minorities like Myanmar's Rohingya or Ethiopia's Tigrayans flooded in from Facebook monitors all over the world. So did accounts of human traffickers and drug cartels using the app for criminal purposes. But the company intentionally segregates the employees responsible for enforcing its policies from those charged with fostering positive relationships with foreign governments. Facebook's dearth of staff and artificial intelligence systems, fluent in particular languages and dialects, compound the challenges of identifying and removing content propagating illegal activities, abuse, and misinformation in developing nations. The company's willingness to cooperate with governments who wish to suppress dissent rather than risk losing access to nation with growing audience bases is also well documented. But responses to the January 6, 2021 attacks on the US Capitol demonstrate the power tech companies can wield to block violent and extremist content. In the immediate aftermath of the 1/6 riot, YouTube, Reddit, and TikTok deleted material questioning the legitimacy of the 2020 elections. Cracking down on the free speech social media network Parler that was rife with disinformation and extremism, Apple and Google stopped selling its app. Amazon Web Services brought Parler to a total halt by refusing to host the service. Parler sued and lost after a New York judge ruled that Amazon was within its rights in enforcing its policies against violent content. Hackers dealt Parler another humiliating blow when they exploited a security flaw in the software architecture to download every public post, picture, and video on the network, and then uploaded the content on the Internet Archive. Twitter, which had exempted President Donald Trump from its acceptable content policies on the grounds that he is a public figure, permanently banned him for inciting violence, thus depriving him of the megaphone he used multiple times a day to reach his 88 million followers. Facebook took similar steps, but only after years of vociferous internal debates that began while Trump was campaigning for president. As early as December 2015, after Trump posted a video calling for a ban on Muslims entering the United States, some Facebook employees called for a removal of what they perceived as hate speech. They were overridden by others who declared the video newsworthy. Throughout his presidency, Trump pushed the boundaries of what social media companies considered content too inflammatory to permit. Time and time again, Facebook and Twitter left Trump's posts and tweets alone, only occasionally affixing a warning label on or opting to hide particularly incendiary posts. With the onset of the coronavirus pandemic, the companies finally took a stronger stance on misinformation about COVID-19 and adopted stricter policies against conspiracy theories and extremist groups. But it is clear that debates over freedom of speech, regulation, and holding accountable those whose online behavior contributes to real-world harms will continue to rage. On January 25th, 1979, Robert Williams, an assembly line worker at the Ford Motor Plant in Flat Rock, Michigan, died instantly when an industrial robot gathering parts alongside him slammed its arm into his head. The accident gave Williams the dubious distinction of becoming the first person in the world known to be killed by a robot. His family sued and won $10 million in damages, resulting from a lack of physical safeguards at the plant. But the case did little to stem the widespread adoption of robotic manufacturing and consumer products. Today, robots vacuum our houses, roam the surface of Mars, harvest fruit and vegetables, and provide critical medical services such as surgical assistance, dispensing prescriptions, disinfecting healthcare facilities, and aiding in physical rehabilitation. But with the ubiquity of robots in our daily lives come major ethical questions that we fail to address at our peril. In no realm are these issues more pressing than warfare. Since 2001, when the Central Intelligence Agency first began using drones in anti-terrorist operations, the United States is estimated to have launched over 14,000 drone strikes in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, and elsewhere, many of them resulting in civilian casualties. Initially, defense officials assumed that drone pilots would escape the trauma experienced by other warriors and did not define drone warfare as a form of combat service. The Pentagon was forced to reevaluate this position when drone pilots, many of whom fly hundreds of missions, reported symptoms of serious PTSD, including emotional distress, insomnia, substance abuse, and suicidal ideation. In some cases, the fact that drone pilots often tracked their targets for weeks and saw them interact with their families and carrying on normal daily activities intensified their despair in ways that soldiers who killed an enemy in the heat of a single battle did not report. But where drones are still operated by humans, acting on orders for other people, a new generation of weapons operate completely independently. Unlike drone pilots, legal autonomous weapons system, given apparently without irony, the acronym LAWS, can identify and strike a target without much human direction. Laws do not experience PTSD, they do not get scared or tired or hungry. The moral implications of such killing machines are breathtaking. Will a machine be able to differentiate between a legitimate combatant and a child in a war zone? Will autonomous weapons equipped with facial recognition software be used to target specific groups or individuals for genocide or political assassination? Would indiscriminate deaths inflicted by driverless tanks, pilotless planes, and robotic infantries render war crimes persecutions meaningless if no sentient being can be held accountable for atrocities? Does a nation become more willing to wage war when fears of putting one's own troops in harm's way are minimized? Conversely, could robotic weapons increase the global community's willingness to intervene in humanitarian disasters? These vexing questions help explain why the United Nations has yet to adopt a legal framework to regulate the use of the nearly autonomous robots that are already being used in combat. In Ukraine, Russia is allegedly deploying the Zala KYB drone, an unarmed armed aerial vehicle that can launch kamikaze strikes on manually programmed target coordinates, while Ukraine is operating semi-autonomous Turkish-made drones. In March 2021, a report authored by the United Nations Security Council claimed that Turkey had used Kargu-2 drones operating with no human guidance to attack soldiers fleeing Libya's civil war. Oscar Gilleras, the CEO of STM, the state-owned manufacturer of the drones, denied that the Kargu-2 had the capability to hunt down targets on its own and emphasized that no target was fired upon without prior human verification. These incidents have sparked renewed calls for a global ban on killer robots. In December 2021, experts gathered in Geneva to review the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, the CCW, continuing 8 years of previous discussions on whether to amend the agreement to ban or limit weapons that can exert lethal force without the direct engagement of a human. Advocates from human rights groups like the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots and a majority of the 125 signatories to the CCW called for a formal ban on autonomous robotic weapons. But several countries developing and deploying these machines, including the United States and Russia, blocked efforts to adopt any binding measures. The meeting ended in failure, leaving nations free to keep building laws with impunity for the foreseeable future. We are unquestionably at a frightening juncture where the digital revolution could end the human rights revolution. Or we can act collectively to make digital rights an integral element of the global human rights agenda, and to demand legislative frameworks that guard privacy, preserve democratic freedoms, and prevent corporate actors from using personal data indiscriminately. Although the recent past has been rife with events that have severely tested my optimistic worldview, I take solace in the knowledge that human rights are not finite and are continually evolving. Collective action and legal mechanisms can safeguard us from a technocratic dystopian future. Ask the content moderators who successfully sued Facebook for failing to provide sufficient mental health support when they suffered PTSD as a result of repeated exposure to social media posts graphically depicting the worst of human behavior. In December 2021, Rohingya refugees sued Meta Platforms, the parent company of Facebook, for $150 billion, accusing it of fueling hate speech that contributed to the deaths and displacement of tens of thousands of Rohingya. Drawing on the massive trove of documents leaked to the press by former Facebook employee Frances Haugen, the suit alleges that Facebook knowingly failed to hire enough content moderators with the linguistic skills and political knowledge to understand the toxic situation arising in Myanmar. Nor did Facebook close accounts or remove content that promoted genocide. The case has enormous implications for human rights and digital rights advocates everywhere. An unusual coalition of right-wing and left-wing U.S. politicians is calling for more transparency and regulation of big tech, while U.S. and European officials are searching for common ground on international reforms that can rein in the worst abuses of civil liberties in the digital world without trampling on America's First Amendment. Masterful use of social media by Ukraine and its allies around the world has helped to revitalize collective security among Western nations and mobilized millions to join efforts to help Ukraine defeat Russian expansionism. So there is cause for hope amid the terrifying technological realities we face. As scary as the future that we and Sophia the robot alike are confronting is, for now at least, humans can still take steps to ensure that justice, freedom, and privacy don't go the way of dial-up modems, Internet Explorer, and MySpace. Thank you.